The Denver Police Department announced this week that it found no violations with how officers handled a shooting of a suspected car thief in 2014, despite disagreement from the Denver Independent Monitor. The case was reviewed by DA Mitch Morrissey, who found that the officers were legally justified. Meanwhile, Morrissey gave a key endorsement to Denver Senior Deputy DA Kenneth Boyd in his run for Denver District Attorney. David, how important is the disagreement between what the police department and Mitch Morrissey found and Denver's Independent Monitor?
Less than you might think, because everyone's in agreement that the officers acted justifiably, appropriately, and in compliance with the then policy of the Denver Police Department use of force in firing the shots against by the way, a guy who had a arrest warrant for auto theft and was driving a stolen car at the time and tried to run over a police officer while escaping. The shootings were plainly justified. The question is, what about starting that confrontation at the time there at a funeral home when there was a funeral going on and there was a risk, which didn't come true, but there was a potential risk to innocent bystanders. That's the dispute. You know, the one argument is, well, we didn't know it was a funeral home, and well, they did have a big sign up and said funeral home, and there were a lot of cars parked there. So that's the issue, but not the justifiability of the shooting itself. On the DA's race, Mitch Morrissey's endorsement is important to those people who want continuity, who think he's been doing a good job. There's another candidate from that office, Helen Morgan, who's also running, but he gave the endorsement to the one that he wants. Now, for the people who say they want to change from the office, there's also two candidates. Beth McCann, the state representative, who starts with a big former DA, big lead in name recognition and getting out there. But on the other hand, the two people who've hired her in the past, Ken Salazar and Wellington Webb, are endorsing another candidate, Michael Kerrigan, who's a former DA, currently a corporate lawyer at Holland and Hart, and in that regard has a lot of office management experience, which is an important thing of what the DA has to do.
Penn, so looking at the situation, the reason we can combine both these issues, you have not only another Denver Police Department issue coming up that makes headlines today, but you have a district attorney candidate who is endorsed by a district attorney who has a perfect record of not filing any charges against police officers, who worked for a predecessor, and Bill Ritter, who had a perfect record of not filing charges against police officers. And this particular candidate, Kenneth Boyd, is related to the predecessor. If you do like continuity, it sounds like you have a real good shot here, but I gotta believe with a lot of the headlines coming out, someone's gonna smell something fishy. What do you think?
Well, in terms of smelling something fishy, I think you could probably have gone back 3 or 4 or 5 other DAs and would have been hard-pressed to find a DA who ever filed charges against a police officer in terms of a shooting. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the last time I saw a DA issue an opinion that said a shooting wasn't justified. And I can't remember the last time the Denver Police Department investigated one of their own and said, gee, this was an unjustified shooting. So none of that is a shock. I think there is, when you look at not just the Black Lives Matter movement, but some of the other things going on in the community, where now these groups have challenged the mayor. They disrupted his speech at the MLK parade. They protested at a city council meeting in a rather, appropriate fashion, civil disobedience. This DA race is going to, I think, generate more attention than perhaps it has in the past. And I'm not certain that the endorsement of the current DA does you any favors at this point, because I think a growing number of people in this community are becoming disenchanted with the entire system, whatever that means. And I'm not convinced that any of these candidates is perceived as someone separate from or outside of the system. None of them have really made any, that I've heard, any groundbreaking statements about how the DA's decision here was wrong or the police department's decision here was wrong. I think the mayor has, to his credit on occasion, said, we're trying to fix this, we've got problems, some of these things aren't right, but I can only do so much. If we fire somebody and career service rehires them, what am I supposed to do? So this is building. Right now, everybody's focused on the national issues, the U.S. Senate race, but at some point this DA race is going to come to prominence. And one thing that'll be interesting, to go back to David's point, Michael Kerrigan got a lot of endorsements early on because he started campaigning 2 years ago. So he signed a lot of people up. I don't know how those endorsements are going to hold up, or how this is going to shake out as more candidates enter the field and more issues like this develop.
Ed, do you think one of those candidates, while no one has really come out on a real political limb yet, could they make some hay, potentially, going out on a limb now, seeing the political climate around this issue in Denver?
Well, absolutely they can. I mean, this is a year when being the narcissist or being the socialist is not as bad as being the establishment candidate. So I think somebody who jumps out and makes waves could do a great thing. But as Dave and Pat have really succinctly said, I mean, it's going to be hard. I mean, you've got two of them who work for the current DA, one of them who's now carrying the "I want to be the next Mitch Morrissey" label on him. You've got a third in Beth McCann, who is clearly the establishment politically. I mean, she's worked for several DAs. She's been in the legislature for 8 years, and Michael Kerrigan, who's not really that far off of being the establishment either. So I don't know what the play is here. I mean, I think if somebody was going to jump up and say the DA's office is very poor at what they're doing, they would have done it already. They're not doing it. I mean, I think what you actually need in this race, if you're going to have somebody completely shake it up, is a fifth candidate who comes in from the outside. And I'm not over-believing that could actually still happen. The more headlines that we see placed on Morrissey and his decisions on whether to prosecute or not. And, I mean, heck, you know, as the Republican Senate race has proven, the more the better.
Patty, even though this is out of Mayor Hancock's hands legally, the DA is going to decide that, does he end up, or will he end up paying a political price for what's going on, at least the perception of what's going on with the DA's office?
Well, I'm not sure he'll pay the political price, but some of the candidates for DA will. I think Ed's absolutely right. Someone else is going to jump into this race, and they should jump in not as a Democrat, because the race otherwise is going to be pretty much over at the primary. When we've got 4 Democrats, come June, at the end of June, we'll know who the next DA is, unless someone else jumps in and runs against them. They'd have to do it not as a Democrat. And I think, given the amount of interest in the presidential race this year, the socialist, the narcissist, and everybody else who's running, I think come November, people would be really interested in looking for a non-establishment candidate, and that would have to be a new candidate in this race.